What if I told you that the most formidable adversary on the Great Plains was not the cold, but ordinary water? Cold, exacerbated by dampness, killed more quickly and reliably than any snowstorm or enemy arrow. The Native Americans of North America lived in a world without synthetics, membrane fabrics, or central heating. They had to survive in conditions where their leather clothing got wet and building a fire in the pouring rain seemed impossible. Humidity turned temperatures around freezing into a deadly trap, drawing heat from the body 25 times faster than dry air. For centuries, people learned to use natural resources to create a barrier between themselves and the icy moisture. Their survival methods were based on a deep understanding of the chemistry of materials, the physics of combustion, and the physiology of their own bodies. Every mistake in preparing for the rainy and wet snow season could cost the entire tribe their lives. Watch the video to the end to learn how ordinary smoke turned leather into a water-repellent shield and why body fat was more important than even the warmest fur coat. What if I told you that everything you believed about the cold was wrong? We are used to thinking that only extremely low temperatures, which cause trees to crack, are dangerous. However, the history of the conquest of North America shows that the real threat lay in transitional weather conditions. Wet snow, freezing rain, and piercing winds created conditions in which a person could die in a matter of hours. In such circumstances, the methods we are accustomed to for keeping warm ceased to work. Moisture penetrated everywhere, soaking clothing, shoes, and bedding. Water filled the microscopic air pockets in the material that normally retained body heat. Once clothing became wet, it ceased to provide warmth and began to act as a refrigerator, drawing heat away from the body. This phenomenon was well known to the indigenous peoples who lived from the forests of the east to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. They knew that staying dry was more important than simply being warmly dressed. Human physiology is not adapted to prolonged exposure of the skin to cold water. The body begins to centralize blood circulation, saving vital organs and leaving the extremities without heat. Fingers and toes lose sensitivity and mobility, making it impossible to build a fire or set up shelter. Native Americans understood these processes intuitively and structured their lives to avoid getting wet at all costs. Their survival strategy was based on preventing the problem rather than dealing with its consequences. The plant fiber clothing used by some tribes absorbed moisture like a sponge. Cotton, which appeared later with the arrival of traders, was called the death fabric precisely because of its ability to kill its owner in wet weather. Therefore, the main material for protection against dampness always remained animal skins, treated in a special way. But simply removing the skin from a bison or deer was not enough to protect against rain. When wet leather dried, it became hard as stone and cold as ice. The peoples of the plains developed complex tanning techniques that made the material resistant to moisture. This was not a simple craft. It was a real chemistry of survival in the wild. They used animal brains, livers, and various fats to alter the structure of the collagen fibers in the skin. These processes required enormous effort and time, but the result was worth the cost. Soft suede protected against the wind, but on its own it could still get soaked through. The main problem was that water not only cooled the wearer, but also made the clothing incredibly heavy. A wet bison's skin cloak could weigh dozens of kilograms, restricting movement and exhausting the traveler's strength. Fatigue combined with hypothermia led to apathy and drowsiness, which often ended in death. Therefore, warriors and hunters always carried spare dry shoes with them and tried not to overheat while moving. Sweat was as dangerous an enemy as the rain outside. The wind in the open spaces of the Great Plains turned even a light drizzle into an endurance test. Drops of water under wind pressure penetrated clothing that was not thick enough, reaching the skin. Native Americans used the landscape to shelter from this deadly combination of wind and water. They never set up camp on open hills during the rainy season. The ability to read the terrain and predict the weather was part of their safety culture. Special attention was paid to protecting the neck and head, through which a tremendous amount of heat escapes. Hoods were not a traditional element for all tribes, but capes and blankets were used everywhere. Thick bison wool, turned inside or outside depending on the conditions, created a barrier to water. The natural fat contained in the wool had water-repellent properties. This allowed water to roll off the pile without penetrating deep into the skin. In the wooded areas of the East, conditions were different, but no less dangerous due to high humidity. There, peoples such as the Iroquois faced constant fog and dampness that penetrated their dwellings. Their methods of protection included the use of tree bark, which did not absorb water. Raincoats and capes made from plant materials complemented leather clothing. It was a constant struggle with nature for the right to keep one's body warm. It is difficult for modern people to imagine what it is like not to be able to go into a warm room and dry your clothes on a radiator. Native Americans lived in conditions where every degree of warmth was achieved through hard work and the knowledge of their ancestors. Their experience of surviving in the damp cold is a monument to human ingenuity and resilience. Have you ever felt colder in the rain than in a severe frost? Please share your thoughts on this. Every opinion is valuable. Are you ready to learn the truth about the oldest analog of modern membrane fabrics? The secret of the waterproofness of Native American clothing lay not in the material itself, but in the method of its final processing. We often see beautiful light-colored deerskin costumes in museums, but work clothes look different. They had a dark, rich color and a specific smell that did not fade over the years. This smell was a sign of a technology that saved lives in conditions of constant dampness. The process that made the leather water-resistant is called smoking or smoking. After the hide was cleaned and tanned with fats, it was exposed to thick smoke for a long time. The hides were sewn into a kind of bag and hung over smoldering rot in a special pit. The smoke penetrated deep into the structure of the fibers, changing the chemical properties of the material at the molecular level. It was not just dyeing, but a real chemical modification of the protein. The substances contained in wood smoke act as tanning agents, enveloping the collagen fibers. Aldehydes from the smoke bind with the proteins in the skin, preventing them from sticking together when wet. Ordinary rawhide dries out after rain and becomes as stiff as plywood, breaking when bent. Smoked leather, on the other hand, remains soft and elastic even after repeated wetting and drying. This property was critical for creating clothing that could be worn for months. In addition, smoking gave the leather hydrophobic properties, causing water to roll off the surface. Raindrops were not absorbed instantly, but remained on the surface, giving the wearer time to find shelter. Of course, it was not completely waterproof, comparable to rubber, but the leather continued to breathe. Vapor permeability allowed sweat to evaporate, preventing clothing from getting wet on the inside. This balance between water protection and ventilation was the pinnacle of technology at the time. Certain types of wood were used for smoking to achieve the desired color and quality. Rotten willow or poplar wood produced a thick, cold smoke that did not burn the leather. The color of the clothing varied from golden yellow to dark brown, depending on the length of time it was treated. The darker the leather, the more resistant it was to moisture and decay. Dark clothing also absorbed the sun's heat better during the rare moments of clear weather. The Plains Indians understood perfectly well the difference between ceremonial and hunting clothing. For ceremonies, they could use snow-white, unsmoked suede decorated with beads. But when going hunting in the rainy season, a warrior would put on an old, heavily smoked shirt. The smell of smoke also helped mask the human scent from the sensitive nose of the prey. It was a universal camouflage that worked on several levels at once. If the clothing did get soaked through, the smoked structure allowed it to dry without losing its shape. The warrior only had to knead the dried shirt in his hands to make it soft again, like fabric. Untreated leather would have required a complex process of greasing and stretching again. The savings in time and effort in the field were enormous. This allowed the unit to remain mobile even in the worst weather. The seams on such clothing also required special treatment to protect against leaks. They were often lined with strips of leather or tendons, which swelled from moisture, blocking the needle holes. Sometimes the seams were additionally coated with fat or a mixture of fur resin. Attention to detail determined the quality of protection of the entire costume. Water always seeks out weak spots, and craftsmen tried to eliminate them. Cape made from bison hides were treated in a similar way, but with the wool preserved. Smoke penetrated the flesh, making the heavy hide more resistant to rot and mold. Mold was another threat in a damp climate, capable of destroying clothing in a matter of days. The antiseptic properties of smoke prevented the growth of bacteria and fungi in natural materials. Clothes lasted longer and remained safe for human health. The smoking technique was widespread, from the subarctic forests to the southern prairies. It was a common cultural code of survival, passed down from generation to generation. Knowledge about which types of rotten wood smoked best and how long to hold the skin over the fire was worth its weight in gold. How long do you think it took to process one skin in the field? Want to know a secret that will change your perception of hygiene and warmth? In today's world, we are used to washing fat off ourselves, considering it dirt. For the indigenous peoples of North America, animal fat was an essential tool for survival and protection. They applied it not only to their clothing, but also directly to their bodies, creating a protective layer. It was biological insulation that worked where clothing could fail. A mixture of bear fat or bison bone marrow with red ochre or herbs was applied to exposed areas of skin. Fat has hydrophobic properties, repelling water and preventing it from evaporating from the body's surface. This prevented the skin from becoming hypothermic due to moisture evaporation in the wind. The layer of fat also protected the skin from chapping and cracking in the cold. In conditions of constant dampness, it was the best cosmetic product. Indians living in colder regions used fat more liberally, covering their entire bodies with it. This helped to retain internal heat, acting as an additional subcutaneous layer, only on the outside. Water that came into contact with the greased skin rolled off in beads without cooling the surface. This method was used by swimmers and warriors who had to cross rivers in cold weather. The fat created a thin but effective barrier between life and icy water. Leather clothing was also regularly impregnated with fat mixtures to enhance its water-repellent properties. The shoulders and hoods of cloaks, which bore the brunt of the rain, were treated with particular care. The fat filled the pores of the leather, preventing water from being absorbed into the material. This made the clothing heavier, but guaranteed it would stay dry for a long time. The main thing was not to overdo it, so as not to impair the breathability of the material. Bear fat was especially valued for its consistency and resistance to rancidity. It was harvested in the fall, when bears accumulated maximum reserves before hibernation. The precious product was stored in animal bladders or leather bags. The use of fat also had ritual significance, but its practical use was paramount. It was a universal cream, medicine, and sealant. The specific smell of rancid fat was an integral part of everyday life, but it was not perceived as unpleasant. In a world where survival depended on warmth, the smell of fat was associated with safety and satiety. In addition, the addition of aromatic herbs such as clary sage or sage helped to mask the sharp notes. This mixture created a unique aromatic profile characteristic of each tribe. People learned to live in harmony with the smells of nature and their own bodies. Interestingly, the fat also protected against insects during the warm but humid season. Gnats and midges could not bite through a layer of fat mixed with mud or ochre. But in winter and late autumn, the main function remained thermoregulation. It was the simplest and most affordable way to increase one's chances in the fight against hypothermia. Nature provided animals with protection, and humans borrowed it from them. Thicker and more refractory fats were used for footwear, often mixed with beeswax or resin. Moccasins were impregnated thoroughly, with special attention paid to the seams and soles. This turned soft leather into something similar to modern rubber galoshes. But even this protection required regular renewal after each long journey. Caring for equipment was a daily responsibility for every member of the tribe. Using fat instead of frequent washing with water also helped to preserve the skin's natural lipid barrier. Washing in cold water washes away protective oils, making the body vulnerable to cold and infection. Native Americans preferred steam baths for deep cleansing and relied on the protective properties of fats in their daily lives. It was an entirely logical adaptation to their environment. This survival method may seem wild to us, but it was scientifically proven by thousands of years of experience. Fat retained heat, protected the skin, and repelled water, making it a multifunctional remedy. Giving it up meant voluntarily reducing one's chances of survival. Don't forget to like this if you were surprised by this ancient survival cosmetology. Guess what happened next if a traveler's feet got wet in sub-zero temperatures? Wet shoes were a guarantee of frostbite and loss of mobility, which in nomadic life meant death. Native American moccasins, made of soft leather, were not completely waterproof like modern rubber boots. Therefore, the strategy for protecting the feet was not based on complete waterproofing, but on a complex system of insulation and moisture removal. Moccasins were only the outer shell. The main thing was hidden inside. The secret to retaining heat was the use of natural insulators that worked even when wet. The moccasins were stuffed with dry grass, sedge, or bison wool, creating a thick insulating cushion. The grass created an air layer around the foot, retaining body heat and ensuring air circulation. If the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with a new bunch, which could be found everywhere. It was a replaceable, disposable sock, gifted by nature itself. Bison wool had unique properties. It retained heat even when wet. Warriors used scraps of wool to wrap their toes, which were most vulnerable to the cold. This method allowed them to maintain blood circulation and sensitivity in their feet in the harshest conditions. The wool also absorbed excess sweat, wicking moisture away from the skin to the outer layers of the shoe. This prevented ice from forming inside the moccasin in severe cold. Moccasins for wet weather were sewn in a special way, often with a high upper that was tied around the calf. The seam connecting the sole and the upper was raised as high as possible so that it did not touch the wet ground. Some tribes used tougher rawhide impregnated with fat and resin for the soles. But even this design could not withstand water for long if standing in a puddle. Therefore, the tactics of movement were no less important than the shoes themselves. The Indians tried not to step into the water unless absolutely necessary, moving over rocks or fallen trees. If they had to wade across a stream, they often took off their moccasins to keep them dry. It was safer to cross icy water barefoot. Quickly wipe your feet and put on dry shoes than to walk in wet ones. This required strict self-discipline and patience, but it saved their health. The camp always had a supply of spare shoes, and wet moccasins were never worn again without being dried. The women of the tribe were constantly repairing and making new shoes, as wear and tear was enormous. On long journeys, warriors took several pairs of moccasins and pieces of leather for repairs. The ability to quickly patch a hole or replace a worn sole was an essential skill. An interesting solution was the so-called mukluks of the northern peoples, prototypes of which were sometimes found further south. These were high shoes with stiff soles and soft uppers, ideally suited for snow slush. However, soft styles prevailed on the plains, allowing for a better feel for the ground and the horse's stirrups. The compromise between sensitivity and protection always leaned toward comfort, compensated for by internal insulation. In winter, moccasins were made with fur inside using skins with thick winter pile. The fur created an additional barrier and excellently wick away moisture, working like modern thermal underwear. However, in wet thaws, the fur could get wet and moldy, so grass insoles remained a universal solution. Their lightness and availability made grass an indispensable resource in any season. Drying shoes required a special skill. The leather could not be placed too close to the fire. The heat could cause wet moccasins to shrink, become stiff and brittle, and become completely unusable. They were dried slowly in warm smoke, constantly kneaded with the hands to preserve their softness. This process took place in the evening hours by the fire and was part of the daily routine of survival. Thus, foot protection was a complex system involving the right materials, replaceable insulation, and strict discipline. The Indians understood that their feet were their transportation, their weapons, and their lives. Neglecting to care for their shoes during the wet season was tantamount to suicide. Do you know which natural material absorbs moisture best? Much has been written about the dwellings of indigenous peoples, but few people think about their effectiveness in rain and slush. The tepee of the Plains Indians is not just a tent, but a complex engineering structure with adjustable ventilation. Its conical shape is ideal for water drainage and wind resistance. But the main secret to keeping the inside warm and dry was the so-called inner wall or lining. The lining of skins was attached to poles inside the teepee, starting from the ground and rising to human height. It created an air gap between the outer covering and the living space. This insulating layer of air worked like a thermos, trapping heat from the fire and keeping the cold out. In addition, the lining directed the draft, forcing the smoke to go straight up into the smoke hole. Even if the outer skin got wet, the inner skin remained dry. During the rainy season, The lower edge of the outer covering of the teepee was pressed tightly to the ground with stones or covered with soil. This prevented water from seeping in and cold wind from blowing across the floor. Inside, the floor was lined with layers of branches, skins, and willow mats. Willow was an excellent material because its twigs created a drainage layer, lifting the inhabitants above the damp ground. Even if water seeped in from below, the skins remained dry on this springy platform. In the longhouses of the Iroquois, designed for many families, the principles of heat conservation were different but no less effective. The thick elm bark used to cover the houses was completely waterproof and resistant to rot. Numerous fireplaces inside and a large number of people created a powerful heat dome. Such a house was warm even in the most damp weather, and moisture could not penetrate the multi-layered walls. The entrance to the dwelling was always a weak spot through which heat escaped. The typepiece used an oval door made of a skin stretched over a frame, which fit tightly to the opening. In long houses, a kind of vestibule was built, creating a buffer zone between the street and the living quarters. These vestibules allowed wet clothes and firewood to be stored without bringing dampness inside. The organization of space played a key role in maintaining the microclimate. A fire was kept burning constantly inside the dwelling, but it had to be small so as not to create excessive drafts. Too strong a fire sucked cold air from outside through the cracks, creating drafts. The Indians skillfully controlled the smoke vents of the teepee, adjusting their position with long poles from outside. They turned the vents downwind, protecting the smoke hole from rain and snow, but allowing smoke to escape. Drying items inside the dwelling was organized on special poles located high above the fire. Warm air rising upward dried clothes and meat supplies. It was important not to block the airflow with items so as not to disrupt ventilation. The drying system was integrated into the design of the house, being an integral part of it. During prolonged rains, the inside of the teepee could become damp due to condensation. Water droplets collected on the poles and could drip onto the inhabitants. To avoid this, special ropes, rain cords, were tied to the poles along which the water flowed down to the ground, bypassing the living space. This simple but ingenious invention solved the problem of dripping without complex technology. Raised platforms or thick bags made of skins were used for sleeping. Sleeping on the bare ground during the rainy season was unacceptable due to the risk of hypothermia of the kidneys and lungs. Beds were folded up during the day and stored in a dry place, only being spread out before bedtime. Respect for a dry sleeping place was part of the culture of everyday life. The dwelling was a fortress, protecting against a hostile environment. The ability to properly set up a teepee, dig a moat around it to drain water, and adjust ventilation was valued no less than the ability to shoot a bow. It was a house that could be assembled and disassembled in an hour, but which provided protection comparable to a permanent structure. What if I told you that you can build a fire even with wet wood? In conditions where everything around you is saturated with water, obtaining fire became an art of the highest order. The Indians could not rely on dry paper or liquid to start a fire. They relied on a deep knowledge of the properties of wood and the ability to find dry wood in wet conditions. The ability to light a fire in the rain often determined whether a group would survive or perish. The secret lay in finding standing dead trees rather than fallen logs. A vertically standing trunk, even without bark, often remained dry inside. The Indians knocked off the outer, wet wood to get to the dry core. Wood chips from such a core would ignite instantly, providing the necessary heat to dry larger branches. They also looked for dry lower branches of coniferous trees, sheltered from direct rain by the crown. Special containers, such as hollow bison horns, were used to transport the fire. In them, smoldering coals, sprinkled with sawdust, could be kept alive for a whole day's journey. This eliminated the need to obtain a spark by friction or flint in the damp wind each time. Carrying a piece of the hearth with you was more reliable than trying to create a new one in poor conditions. Birch bark was a real lifesaver for the peoples of the forest zone in the north. Birch bark contains tar and oils that burn even when wet and produce high temperatures. A roll of birch bark could serve as a powerful kindling, capable of igniting even damp branches. Supplies of birch bark were carried in special waterproof pouches on the belt. The process of building a fire required careful preparation of the site. Kindling was never placed directly on damp ground or snow. First, a platform was built from thick branches or stones, isolating the future flame from moisture below. A temporary canopy was often made over the fire from skins or bark to protect the weak flame from raindrops until it gained strength. The Indians knew which types of wood burned hot and which only smoked. For example, resinous pine provided quick heat but shot out sparks, which was dangerous for clothing. Hard deciduous woods, such as oak or maple, provided the steady, long-lasting heat needed to dry things. The choice of fuel depended on the specific task, to warm up quickly or to maintain heat throughout the night. Another way to keep warm without a large fire was to use heated stones. The stones were heated in a communal fire and then wrapped in leather or placed in a pit under the sleeping area. Such a stone radiator gave off heat for hours, allowing people to sleep warm even on a cold night. This was safer than keeping an open fire near sleeping people. In wet weather, the fire was guarded like the apple of one's eye. The camp duty officer made sure that the fire was not flooded by rain and that the wood was dry before being put on the fire. Wet wood was placed around the hearth, where it steamed and dried, creating a protective screen. This continuous cycle of drying fuel ensured stable combustion. The ability to obtain fire by friction in damp conditions required enormous effort and dry tinder. Therefore, tinder, dried tinder, fungus, or rotten wood, was carried in the most protected place, close to the body. The loss of dry tinder was a disaster. Warriors could sacrifice food, but they never threw away their flint and tinder. Fire was not just physical warmth, it was the center of the world, a source of moral strength. In a wet, gray, and cold world, a bright flame gave hope and a sense of home. Do you think you could manage to build a fire in the rain with only a knife and flint? Heat comes not only from outside, but also from within. Native Americans understood perfectly well the connection between nutrition and the body's ability to withstand the cold. In damp and cold conditions, the metabolism speeds up, requiring a huge amount of calories. Ordinary plant foods could not provide as much energy as was needed to heat the body from within. Fats and proteins became the main fuel for the internal furnace. Pemmican was the perfect food for these conditions. This mixture of dried and powdered bison meat, mixed with melted fat and berries, was an energy bomb. A small piece of pemmican provided a feeling of fullness and a rush of warmth for several hours. The fat was slowly digested, providing a long-lasting release of energy needed to maintain body temperature. It was a strategic reserve that did not spoil for years and was not affected by moisture. Hot food was critical for boosting morale and warming up quickly. Even if it was not possible to roast meat, the Indians tried to drink hot herbal teas or simply boiling water. Broths from bones and meat were cooked by throwing hot stones into leather bags or wooden vessels filled with water. This method allowed liquid food to be cooked without metal utensils and placed directly on the coals. Fat consumption was deliberately increased during the cold season. Hunters ate raw fat or bone marrow immediately after a successful hunt to regain their strength. They knew that a low-fat diet in the cold led to rapid weight loss and weakness. Europeans who found themselves in similar conditions and tried to eat only lean meat often suffered from rabbit starvation, while the Indians felt fine. Water, despite the dampness around them, was essential to prevent dehydration. Cold dulls the sense of thirst, but the body loses moisture through breathing and sweat. The Indians forced themselves to drink, knowing that thick blood carries oxygen and heat to the extremities less efficiently. They melted snow or collected rainwater, but never ate snow cold, so as not to waste precious heat melting it inside the stomach. Some herbs and roots were used as blood circulation stimulants. Pungent or spicy plants were added to food to cause blood to rush to the skin and warm up. It was a kind of natural remedy for chills. Healers knew recipes for decoctions that helped the body fight colds in the early stages. The diet was also adjusted to weather conditions. Before going to bed, people tried to eat a hearty meal of fatty foods so that the body would generate heat at night. In the morning, they ate to get energy for active activities. A hungry person froze much faster, so food distribution on a hike was strict and fair. Food supplies were stored in special hiding places and parflashes, bags made of rawhide. These bags were dense and protected the contents from moisture and rodents. A guaranteed supply of calories gave confidence in the future. Without a reliable supply of pemmican, survival in the winter steppe would have been impossible. Observing animals gave people the right strategy. Wolves and bears stored up fat for winter, and people did the same, but in the form of supplies. The culture of consuming the entire animal without waste ensured maximum hunting efficiency. Not a single calorie should be wasted. Thus, a spoonful of hot fat could save a life more reliably than an extra blanket. The internal furnace worked flawlessly as long as it was fed the right fuel. This was the biological basis for survival in the harsh climate of North America. Survival is a balance between activity and energy conservation. The Indians knew the golden rule of cold weather. If you sweat, you die. In wet weather, sweat-soaked clothing cools instantly as soon as a person stops moving. Therefore, the art of movement was to walk at a moderate pace without overheating. During transitions, soldiers often removed excess layers of clothing, keeping only the minimum necessary to protect themselves from the wind. They only put on warm clothes during breaks to conserve the heat they had accumulated. This cold start tactic required willpower, but it kept their clothes dry on the inside. Europeans often made the mistake of wrapping up too warmly before setting out, and quickly became wet from their own sweat. When it became necessary to stop, the actions were rehearsed to the point of automatism. It was not enough to simply sit on the ground or a rock. It was necessary to immediately insulate oneself from the cold surface by placing a skin, branches, or a mat underneath. Heat loss through contact with the ground occurs very quickly and imperceptibly. In camp, they tried to minimize unnecessary movements so as not to waste energy. All necessary items were placed within arm's reach. Women organized their workspace so that they could perform tasks while sitting on warm skins. Saving calories was part of their survival strategy in times of scarce resources. Sleep was a special state for which they prepared themselves. They slept in groups, huddling together to combine the warmth of their bodies. This method of collective heating was the most effective way to survive a frosty night. Alone, a person needs much more energy and clothing to keep warm. If they had to wait out a storm in a snow shelter or a hastily made hut, movement was even more restricted. People could sit motionless for hours, entering a trance-like state. This slowed down their metabolism and reduced their need for food. The ability to endure discomfort and wait was an important psychological skill. However, complete immobility threatened muscle stiffness and frostbite. Therefore, they periodically did warm-up exercises, tensing and relaxing their muscles without leaving their seats. They wiggled their toes and fingers and made faces to get the blood flowing to their faces. This invisible gymnastics kept them toned without causing sweating. Breathing in the cold was also controlled. They tried to breathe through their noses so that the air had time to warm up and exhale into their collars or fur, retaining some of the heat. However, they had to make sure that the condensation from their breath did not wet their clothes on their chests. They often used the edge of their cloaks as a filter, breathing through the wool. Children and the elderly were the center of attention, warmed by the body heat of the strongest members of the family. This strengthened social bonds and ensured the survival of the tribe. Caring for others was a pragmatic condition for the survival of the group. A lone individual in the steppe was doomed, but a group had a chance. The balance between activity to keep warm and rest to conserve energy is an art refined over centuries. Native Americans were masters of this balance, sensing the needs of their bodies better than any device. They lived in tune with nature, slowing down when it slowed down and acting when necessary. The human body is capable of adapting to incredible conditions if trained. Native Americans did not simply protect themselves from the cold, they trained themselves not to fear it. Hardening began in early childhood and continued throughout life. Children were taught to run barefoot in the snow and bathe in icy water to strengthen their immunity and spirit. Daily morning swims in the river were the norm for many tribes, even when the water was covered with ice. It was not just a hygienic procedure, but a ritual of purification and strengthening of the will. After the icy water, the body began to burn. Blood rushed to the skin, creating a powerful internal heat. This shock method trained the blood vessels to react quickly to temperature changes. Adult warriors took pride in their ability to endure the cold without shivering. Shivering is a protective reaction of the body, but it consumes a lot of energy and interferes with aiming a bow or rifle. The ability to suppress shivering through willpower was considered a sign of strength and self-control. This was achieved through years of training and meditative practices. Steam baths, inipi, played a huge role in adaptation. The sharp contrast between the hot steam inside and the icy air outside trained thermoregulation. After the bath, people often rubbed themselves with snow or plunged into the river. These procedures cleansed the pores and made the skin more elastic and resistant to external influences. Psychological attitude was no less important than physical training. Cold was perceived not as an enemy, but as a part of the world with which one must coexist. Complaining about the weather was considered a sign of weakness and bad manners. Calm acceptance of discomfort helped to conserve nervous energy and maintain clarity of mind. Historical chronicles describe cases when Indians slept on the snow, wrapped in only one blanket, and woke up refreshed in the morning. Europeans were amazed by their ability to walk with their chests exposed or barefoot in the frost. This was the result of adaptation, in which brown fat in the body began to work more actively, generating heat. However, this resilience was not recklessness. The Indians knew the limits of their abilities very well and did not take unnecessary risks. If the cold became life-threatening, they used all available means of protection. Bravery was appropriate in competitions, but not in the struggle for survival. The elders passed on their knowledge of the signs of hypothermia to the young. The appearance of white spots on the skin and loss of sensitivity required immediate action. Mutual assistance and attentiveness to one another helped to spot danger in time. No one was left alone to freeze. Genetics also played a role. Millennia of living in a harsh climate had shaped certain physiological characteristics. The metabolism of indigenous peoples was tuned to the efficient use of fats and heat conservation. But without constant training, even genetics would not have saved them. Thus, the Native American body itself became an instrument of survival. A hardened will and a trained body were the last line of defense when clothing and fire were unavailable. It was a philosophy of strength through overcoming. We have come a long way in studying the survival methods of the indigenous peoples of North America. Their experience is not just a set of life hacks, but a holistic system of interacting with the world. They did not fight nature, but used its laws to their advantage. Water, cold, and wind were not enemies, but conditions of a problem that needed to be solved. Every element of their daily life, from the stitching on their moccasins to the shape of their dwellings, was refined through centuries of trial and error. Behind these technologies lie thousands of years of experience and millions of lives of those who did not make it. The Indians proved that humans can live, not just survive, in the most extreme climatic zones of the planet. Their clothing was the prototype for modern equipment, and their diet was the basis for modern sports nutrition. They understood the importance of layers, ventilation, and waterproofing long before the invention of synthetics. The use of natural materials such as leather, fur, grass, and fat was maximally effective. These materials were renewable, affordable, and perfectly suited to local conditions. Nothing superfluous, only functionality and reliability. Today, with our advanced technology, we often forget simple physical principles. We rely on gadgets and batteries that can fail. The experience of the Native Americans reminds us that the main tools for survival are knowledge, ingenuity, and strength of spirit. The ability to build a fire, keep your feet dry, and not panic is still relevant in the 21st century. We see that comfort is a relative concept. For Native Americans, comfort meant dryness and no wind, not a room temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. The ability to be content with little and find joy in simple things helped them maintain psychological stability. This is an important lesson for modern consumer society. The history of survival on the Great Plains and in the forests of the North is full of drama and wisdom. It is a story of the alliance between man and nature, bound by respect and caution. We can learn a lot from those who called these harsh lands their home. Their legacy lives on not only in museums, but also in every piece of advice on tourism and survival. Smoked leather, pemmican, teepees, and moccasins are symbols of ingenious simplicity. They show that the most complex problems often have simple but elegant solutions. You just need to be able to look around and see opportunities where others see obstacles. I hope this journey into the past has made you look at familiar things in a new way. Perhaps the next time you get caught in the rain, you will remember smoked leather and grease. And maybe this knowledge will make you a little more resilient to the vagaries of the weather. Thank you for joining us at the end of this story. The world of survival is vast and full of forgotten secrets waiting to be discovered. Which of the ancient methods of protection against dampness did you find most unexpected or ingenious? Was it treating clothes with smoke or applying fat directly to the skin? Share your thoughts in the comments. We are very interested to know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new dives into the history of everyday life in the past.